Chapter 6. A Budding Romance. Margaret did not see Lloyd to speak to again for over a week. True, she saw him at church the following Sunday morning, but only at a distance. He was too busy, it seemed, to even come and shake hands with her. He was head usher at the time and also teacher of the Baraka class. Margaret went home with a heavy heart. In fact, she felt so ill that afternoon that she went to her room after dinner and stayed home from church that night. The next morning she felt better. It was on this day that she records in her diary that her Aunt Mattie gave her some snapshots of Russell Cliver. The entry reads, "There are wonderful pictures of the most wonderful young man that ever lived. My, how I loved him." Margaret had been surrounded by men of high caliber all her life. Her father, Mr. Fred, was of impeccable character, and she had several uncles and male cousins who likewise were men of simple virtue. There was one of them that she was especially fond of, who had a resonant baritone voice. His name was Earl Hathaway of Ellington, Connecticut. He was the youngest of Dwight and Hannah Hathaway's children, and greatly loved by all who knew him. Margaret played the piano well, and whenever they got together he enjoyed singing with her accompaniment. Earl, too, was killed in France during World War I. But somehow Russell excelled them all, and this accounted for the entry in her diary that referred so tenderly to him. After all, it's a rare privilege for a young woman to have the advantage of having such noble companions. Now she seemed to be comparing Lloyd with these fine men. However, at the moment when she thought another virtuous man was about to enter her life, she was not as confident about it as she would like to have been. The following Tuesday night, while she was walking downtown with her cousins, Lloyd was on the sidewalk outside the Baptist church with the Boy Scout troop. The girls tried to get his attention, but he barely raised his eyes to look at them. Was it that made him so elusive, she wondered? Was he aware that she was engaged to someone else? Had he noticed the ring on her finger? There seemed to be no immediate solution to the problem, or any answer to her question. Her mind was filled with apprehension. There was no one she could talk to about her enigma. Margaret was puzzled. It appeared as if she had been thrown headlong into the path of a man she was now secretly and desperately in love with, without any response from him whatsoever. But Margaret was discreet. She had been brought up in the best New England culture, and she realized that no matter if she lost this man who had walked so mysteriously into her life, she must restrain herself from any ulterior demonstration. No one would ever know her feelings about him. She would suffer alone. Her cousin Frances had made it clear to her that Lloyd was a professional heartbreaker and that he liked to try his charms on all the girls. This Margaret refused to believe. For the time being, she would sit tight and just wait. In the meantime, she was busy being entertained by her three cousins. It was wonderful getting acquainted with them all over again after so many years of separation. They had not been together for 3 years ever since she and her mother came to Franklin, Indiana in 1916 to attend Faye's and Russell's graduation from college. Now with Uncle Henry's new parsonage in Benton Harbor, they were all enjoying every minute of her visit. Lake Michigan was the greatest attraction of them all, but one afternoon the four cousins attended a cinema downtown and enjoyed the hilarity afforded by Mary Pickford's performance in Daddy Longlegs. One evening, towards the end of the first week of Margaret's visit, they went to Chantagua, which was having a week's run in a huge tent at Hall Park. As Margaret glanced around through the crowd, to her great amazement, she thought she spied Lloyd sitting on the opposite side of the tent with a young lady beside him. She was a very attractive girl, too, with dark brown hair and eyes and a charming smile. Was it really Lloyd? She called Eulen's attention to them. Sure enough, it was. Lloyd was looking in their direction, but they were too far away for him to pay them any heed. Margaret heard very little of the concert that evening. Occasionally, she would glance curiously in his direction, but Lloyd seemed so absorbed in his date that he never noticed. Perhaps Frances' affirmation was true after all. Maybe Lloyd was a professional heartbreaker, or just conceivably he did have a steady girlfriend. How was she to know? After all, why shouldn't he have? He was 24 years old, and a very personable young man. She even wondered how it happened he hadn't married by now. Why did these things bother her so intensely, she wondered. What claim did she have to him? She had only met him a few nights before, and after all, she knew very little about him. But there was some kind of a magnetic force that seemed to have drawn them together the night of their first meeting, and Margaret could not lose sight of that fact. She felt that Lloyd was meant for her from the first time their eyes had met across the table at Uncle Louis'. But tonight he appeared to have no eyes for her. All of his attention was being focused on another. Margaret was downright downcast as she left the park that night and walked home without meeting Lloyd and the girl again. She could not tell whether she was envious of the other girl or sorry for herself. She went to bed that night with a feeling of doubt as to whether her decision to break off her own engagement, which she had consummated that very morning, had been done too hastily. Her mind was confused. She knew she could have the man she did not really love, and now she was afraid that she might not ever possess the man she truly wanted. Several days passed uneventfully, but the following Wednesday night after prayer meeting, Lloyd approached Margaret and commenced to talk about their night out. He even wanted to know what the folks' reaction was when she went in that night, a week previous. This was the first time he had any conversation with her since then. She told him how her cousin Frances glared at her from the foot of the stairs as she entered the living room, and of how all the rest of the family were standing around waiting for her to show up. But she was cautious not to tell him what her Aunt Mattie had said about Lloyd being the kind of man she ought to marry. Perhaps that could be told later. Deep down in her heart she hoped so, but not now. Then he asked her if she would like to go out for a little ride. Of course, she was delighted, and he asked Frances to go along too. He knew Mrs. Cliver would not allow them to go without an escort. They all sat in the front seat with Margaret in the middle. Lloyd drove to Coloma, and as they went by a street sign on the highway by the park, Margaret was surprised to see the bottom placard read, New York, so many miles. She was so amazed to think that they were on the road to New York City, which seemed almost like home to her, that she suddenly exclaimed, "It says New York on that signpost." By the time they were out of reading distance, Lloyd said he didn't believe it. Margaret, who was very certain of it, said she bet it did say New York. Yet Lloyd was so sure that he was right that he suggested that they bet a 2-pound box of candy on it. Margaret took him up on it. In order to prove it, he drove around the park to the spot where the sign was located, and there, sure enough, much to Margaret's delight and Lloyd's astonishment, were the words New York, spelled out in bold letters. It made Lloyd's eyes pop out. He was much embarrassed for expressing his lack of confidence in Margaret, and he had lost a bet. Lloyd said that it was the first time he had ever lost a bet with a girl, and Margaret confessed it was the first time she had ever won one from a fellow. Frances, who had not taken sides, was as pleased as Punch over her cousin's luck. She giggled and bubbled over with excitement all the way home, and the others laughed with her. They were happily back at 10:30, wondering where the time had gone so fast. 2 days passed before they saw each other again, when Lloyd called early in the afternoon to invite Margaret and any other member of the family who could go for a ride. Eulyn and Rachel were the only ones to accept, and Eulyn literally pushed her cousin into the front seat, saying Lloyd was doing this for her. By now, all the family were aware that a true romance was budding. Rev Cliver returned from New York that afternoon. While they were gone, that evening, 2 friends of the older girls, Lawrence Sizer and Preston Sweet, who had been guests at dinner, took the pastor and his daughters and Margaret to a BYPU party in their automobile. Lloyd was there, and after the party, he took the Clivers home. Margaret was so wide awake and thrilled over the events of the day that she couldn't get to sleep until the wee hours of the morning. 2 more days passed before Lloyd saw Margaret again, but from now until her departure from home, he had made up his mind that there was no time to waste, and if he was going to be serious about this new girl who had come so lately, unexpectedly into his life, he wanted to see her all he could of her. And to be sure, he was right before he popped the question. From now on, he wouldn't let any grass grow under his feet. If Margaret had set her cap for him, he had equally taken a fancy to her. He dreamed of her at night and lost his appetite by day. He determined that he must find out whether or not Margaret was engaged to someone else, and then, if she were, not to let her know how he felt about her. But how do you get up enough nerve to tell a girl how you feel about her when you are in love? He wondered. They were together nearly all the day the following Sunday. Both attended church as was their usual custom. Early that afternoon, Lloyd came while Ewan and Margaret was still doing the dinner dishes. He was bringing a box of chocolates that he had lost in the bet with Margaret the Wednesday night before. After visiting with the family for a while, the two young friends went up to the beach at Higman Park, where they left the car and climbed the steep hill to the bluff, and walked a half a mile or so to Rocky Gap, where they sat on a big boulder which jutted out into the lake. There, listening to the waves washing up on the rock and facing the warm breeze, which was now blowing gently from the south, they rested and talked for a long time. It was there that Lloyd told Margaret that he enjoyed her company better than any other girl he had ever been with. Her diary says she felt like saying she felt the same about him, but her propriety held her back from saying so. He said no more. He had not yet found out whether or not she was engaged to another. He, too, would exercise discretion and endeavor to hold back his real feelings for her until he knew. Perhaps tonight he would have better opportunity to ask her, but not now. Margaret could hardly contain herself. She was so sure of her love for him that it was difficult for her to curb her own emotions. Frances continually reminded her of Lloyd's fickleness when it came to girls, but Margaret brushed the advice off lightly, pretending she did not care, while responding to her by saying, "I don't care if he is. I like him, and we are having a good time while it lasts." However, she realized they were getting into deep water. She knew her heart would be broken if he did not state his intentions soon. She expected to go back east within the week, perhaps sooner if her mother wrote for her to come. But a letter the following day from her mother stated that there was no cast-iron rule about her coming home. With that in her favor, Margaret decided to stay until the following Tuesday, which was the day after Labor Day. "I'm so glad," she wrote in her diary, "because that will give me a chance to get better acquainted with Lloyd." Later, she added, "I never met a man I liked so well and who was interested in so many of the same things as I am." Then wistfully she wrote, "Oh, if our friendship could only be lasting."